Chapter 3, Part 2 of Breaking the Outer Ring, Marine Landings in the Marshall Islands by John C. Chapin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Marine Attack, Roy Namur. Finally, at 1930, Colonel Franklin A. Hart, commander of the 24th Marines, ordered his men to dig in for the night. The troops had come across a good portion of the island. Now they would hold the ground gained and get ready for the morrow. One rifleman, Robert F. Graff, later wrote about that time. Throughout the night, the fleet sent flares skyward, lighting the islands as the flares drifted with the prevailing wind. Ghostly flickering light was cast from the flares as they drifted along on their parachutes. Laying in our foxhole, my buddy and I were watching, waiting, and straining our ears trying to filter out the known sounds. Our foxhole in that sand was about 6 feet long by 2 feet in depth and just about wide enough to hold the two of us. Since I had eaten only my D ration since leaving the ship, I was hungry. D rations were bittersweet chocolate bars about 1.5 inches square and were supposed to be full of energy. I removed a K ration from my pack and opened it. K rations came in a box about the size of a Cracker Jack box and had a waterproof coating. These rations contained a small tin of powdered coffee or lemonade, some round hard candies, a package of 3 cigarettes, and a tin about the size of a tuna fish can containing either cheese, hash, or eggs with a little bacon. We dined on our rations, drank water from our canteens, and prepared to settle in for the night. After finishing chow, we elected to take 2-hour watches, one on guard while the other slept. Also, we made sure we knew where our buddies' foxholes were, both on the left and on the right of us. Thus we were set up so that anyone to our front would be an enemy. Our first night in combat had started. Before dawn, the Japanese mounted a determined counterattack which was finally repulsed. Nevertheless, it was a tragic night for one particular family. A 19-year-old Marine private first class and his 44-year-old father, a corporal, had been together in the same company back in California, but the son was hospitalized with a minor illness and then transferred to another outfit. The father boarded his ship prepared to sail for combat alone, but then his son was found stowed away on it in order to be with his father. The young man was taken off and was placed under arrest. His mother, however, telephoned the commandant's office in Washington and told the story of her son's effort to be together with her husband. The charges were dropped and the two were reunited for the trip to the Marshalls. The son was killed that first night on Namur. The father went on fighting alone. Early on the afternoon of the next day, 2 February, D+2, the 24th Marines finished its conquest of Namur, and the island was declared secured. In the final moments of combat, however, Lieutenant Colonel Aquila J. Dias, commander of the 1st Battalion, was standing to direct the last attack of his men. A burst of machine gun fire riddled his body, and he became the most senior officer to die in the battle. For his superb leadership under fire, he was awarded a posthumous Medal of Honor. Across the sandspit on Roy, it had been a different story. This island was nearly bare, for it was mostly covered by airfield runways. When the 23rd Marines hit the beaches on D+1, the fierceness of the pre-landing bombardment prevented the Japanese defenders from mounting a coordinated defense. Small groups of Marine riflemen joined their regiment's attached tanks in a race across to the far side of the island. This charging style caused considerable confusion as to who was where. Reorganized into more coherent units, the men made a final orderly drive to finish the job. In spite of the rapid progress on Roy, there were still some major enemy strongpoints which had to be dealt with. An after-action report of the 2nd Battalion described one example of this perilous work in matter-of-fact terms. There was a blockhouse constructed of reinforced concrete approximately 3 feet thick. It had 3 gun ports, one each facing north, east, and west, another indication of the enemy's mistaken assumption that the Americans would attack from the sea rather than the lagoon shore. 2 heavy hits had been made on the blockhouse, one apparently by 14-inch or 16-inch shells and the other by an aerial bomb. Nevertheless, the position had not been demolished. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Edward J. Dillon, then ordered Company G to take the blockhouse. The company commander first sent forward a 75mm half-track, which fired 5 rounds against the steel door. At this point, a demolition squad came up, and its commander volunteered to knock out the position with explosives. While the half-track continued to fire, infantry platoons moved up on each flank of the installation. The demolition squad placed charges at the ports and pushed Bangalore torpedoes through a shell hole in the roof. Ceasefire was then ordered, and after hand grenades were thrown inside the door, half a squad of infantry went in to investigate. Unfortunately, the engineers of the demolition squad had not got the word to cease fire and had placed a shape charge at one of the ports while the infantry was still inside. Luckily, no one was hurt, but as the company commander reported, a very undignified and hurried exit was made by all concerned. Inside were 3 heavy machine guns, a quantity of ammunition, and the bodies of 3 Japanese. Many Japanese had to be flushed out or blown up in the airfield's drainage ditches and culverts, but by 1800 that day, D+1, Roy had been secured. Secured seemed a somewhat flexible term when the first service of Mass, held the next day, was interrupted by Japanese shots. By 6 February, however, the ground elements of a Marine aircraft wing were ensconced at the airfield, preparing for the arrival of their planes in 5 more days. For the entire remainder of the war, these planes pounded the bypassed atolls with such power that the Japanese on them were eliminated from any further role in the war. There was one surprise Japanese air raid on Roy, staged from the Mariana Islands on 12 February. This caused a number of casualties and major damage to material. The repair of the airfield and its quick return to action was a tribute to the skills of both the 20th Marines, an engineer regiment, and the 109th Naval Construction Battalion, Seabees. This achievement was one more illustration of the vital role played by a dizzying list of units that supported the assault rifle battalions. Besides the vast armada of naval planes, ships, and landing craft, there were Navy chaplains and corpsmen, 2 specialties which are always Navy. In addition to the Marine air, artillery, and engineer units, there were the tanks, heavy weapons, mortar transport, quartermaster, signals, and headquarters supporting units. An amphibious operation, to be successful, must be a finely tuned, highly trained juggernaut that depends on all its parts working smoothly together, and this was clearly demonstrated in the Marshalls. The conquest of Roy Namur had been a relatively easy operation when compared to some of the other Marine campaigns in the Pacific. At Tarawa, for example, more than 3,300 men had been killed or wounded in 76 hours. The 4th Division's victory came at a cost of 313 Marines and corpsmen killed and 502 wounded. By contrast, the defeated Japanese garrison numbered an estimated 3,563, with all but a handful of them now dead. 2 more tasks remained for the 4th Division. The first was mopping up the rest of the islets in the northern 2/3 of the atoll. The 25th Marines, which had supported the attacks of the 23rd and 24th, took off on a series of island-hopping trips on board their LVTs. The regiment checked out more of the exotically named islets such as Boggerlap, Marcelgalt, Gegibu, Eniwetok, and Iru. The 25th found no resistance, and by D+7 it had covered all 50 of the islets that were its objectives. This assignment was a total change from what the regiment had experienced around Roy Namur. One writer, Carl W. Prohl, described the expedition this way. It was on this junket that the men of the 25th got to know the Marshall Island natives, for it was these Marines who freed them from Japanese domination. On many islets, bivouacking overnight, the natives and Marines got together and sang hymns. The Marshall Islanders had been Christianized many years before, and missionaries had taught them such songs as "Onward Christian Soldiers." K-rations and cigarettes also made a big hit with them. And more than one Marine sentry, walking post in front of a native camp, took up the islanders' dress and wore only a loincloth, usually a towel from a Los Angeles hotel. The final task that remained for the division was a miserable one. Roy and Namur were littered with dead Japanese. The stench was overpowering as their bodies putrefied in the blazing tropical sun. All hands, officers and enlisted, were put to work day and night on burial details. "Hey, I just finished 2 days of brutal combat. We don't have any gloves or equipment for this. Too bad, just start doing it anyway." Health conditions were so bad that 1,500 men in the division were suffering from dysentery when the troops finally reboarded transports for the journey back to their rear base at Maui in the Hawaiian Islands. Sidebar: Naval support. The infantry assault units in the Marshall's operations were carried by an incredible array of ships designed to perform very specialized functions. Also included were converted destroyers. The amphibian tractors carried the invading Marines into the beaches, supplemented by the older ramped landing craft. Added to these were a jumble of acronyms, LCI, LST, LSM, etc., for infantry, rockets, tanks, and trucks. No landings would have been successful, however, without the crucial support of naval gunfire and aerial bombardment. The fast task force that roamed the Pacific and the support groups which stood off the island objectives were visual proof of the deadly striking power that had been reborn in the U.S. Navy in the 2 years since the debacle at Pearl Harbor. Nearly all the old, slow battleships which had lain shattered in the mud were back in action and now were joined by brand new, fast counterparts, and the familiar old peacetime carriers were now supplemented by a steady flow of new fleet carriers and the innovation of small escort carriers. This is the roll call of the ships which poured in their fire before and during the landings. Battleships: Tennessee, BB-13, Colorado, BB-45, Maryland, BB-46, Pennsylvania, BB-38, Idaho, BB-42, New Mexico, BB-40, and Mississippi, BB-41. Heavy cruisers: Louisville, CA-28, Indianapolis, CA-35, Portland, CA-33, Minneapolis, CA-36, San Francisco, CA-38, and New Orleans, CA-32. Light cruisers: Santa Fe, CL-60, Mobile, CL-63, and Biloxi, CL-80. Carriers: Saratoga, CV-3, Princeton, CVL-23, Langley, CVL-28, Enterprise, CV-6, Yorktown, CV-10, Belleau Wood, CVL-24, Intrepid, CV-11, Essex, CV-9, Cabot, CVL-27, Cowpens, CVL-25, Monterey, CVL-26, and Bunker Hill, CV-17, plus 6 escort carriers. Destroyers: the Kwajalein Atoll landings had 40 in direct support. End of Chapter 4.